Hi, welcome. I can see people joining this webinar this afternoon. Welcome. Hi, everybody. It's lovely to have so many people signing in. And it's a glorious sunny day here in the UK. So I hope it's lovely and shining on you wherever you're joining from. Perhaps you might want to dialing in from, perhaps add to the chat. Hi, Mona from Saudi. Lovely to hear from you. Do let us know where you're from. I think we have a really great international audience signing in. Somebody from Milton Keynes, that's not far from me actually. Someone from Estonia. Hi. Hi, Diane from Newcastle, Chicago, Boston. Fantastic to have you. As we talk about innovation this afternoon. We've just got a couple more minutes while people sign in. From London, Pakistan, Oman, Stoke Newington. Hi Gidon, nice to have you. Someone from Abu Dhabi. I lived in Abu Dhabi actually for 7 years. My daughter was born there, so I have lovely fond memories of time in the Middle East. KSA from Tokyo, lovely. And Zurich. Okay, this is brilliant, guys. Thank you very, very much for sharing where you're all from. I think we might start shortly. Just give everyone a couple more minutes. I think that's my signal to get this show on the road, as they say. So welcome to this afternoon's webinar. We've got about 45 minutes together. There will be an opportunity for us to chat at the end, but in the meantime, do post your questions and comments in the chat. I've got some fantastic technical facilitators who are going to sort through some of those questions today. So just a very quick introduction to Hult Ashridge. For those of you who don't know, we're part of the world's largest private education company, Education First. And they provide language training, cultural exchange programs, fantastic international connections for English language students globally. And then we have Hult Ashridge and the executive education team, which is where I'm from. We're a triple accredited business school, which is a relatively rare beast these days. We've got over 60 years combined experience. And we've got some beautiful campuses around the world. So I spend much of my time in the Ashridge campus, which is a fantastic old building, and also across the pond in our San Francisco campus, which is a much more kind of modern iteration, but we really have this kind of global footprint. And together we like to think we can bring a really great combination of sort of language, of education and experience to a really broad group of people, many of whom I hope are in the group with us today. So I'm going to just quickly recap the purpose of our time together. We're going to think about innovation, agile innovation in the context of this global pandemic, and also kind of going forward into the new world that we will emerge into, hopefully sooner rather than later. This is a bit of a taster really. So we have a whole range of online skills. We provide remote and virtual learning across a number of different topics. So whilst this isn't, you know, it's not a true reflection, I guess, of what an online workshop would be, just hopefully it will give you a little idea of some of the things that we can offer and pique your interest. So we will put a link in the chat if you want to find out any more. But I'm now going to turn my video off for the next part of this, but you can see a picture of my beautiful face. This is me. I am Victoria Harrison Marawa. I'll just give you a quick introduction to myself. So I've got a 20-year career that spans multiple sectors, multiple geographies, delivering innovation programs for a range of blue chip organizations. And I'm currently the lead faculty at Ashridge working in the innovation discipline. So I've got a passion for all things innovation and all things kind of digital. And I feel really pleased right now that this is my area of expertise for two reasons. First, because innovation is inherently optimistic. You have to believe that there's a solution out there in order to engage in any kind of innovation process. So that's my kind of number one. And second, because when times get tough, as I'm sure many of you are experiencing right now, as am I, innovation really gets going. So this webinar is hopefully a kind of upbeat message that now is not the time to stop innovating, now is the time to start. COVID-19 is bringing the innovator out in all of us, and all of you. I mean, I'm seeing this kind of innovation spirit everywhere, whether it's a 90-year-old relative joining on a Zoom call or in house party for the first time. My sister, who's turned around 3 schools to virtual delivery in about a week. My local pub that's transformed itself into a bakery and food delivery centre. You know, we've seen orchestras performing together remotely. My daughter even had an orthodontist checkup via email last week. I think we would all have examples of innovation, adaptation. In a way, I think we're all living agile right now. And the important thing to try and remember about that is to feel good from it, and remember that it's providing us with the kind of muscle memory that we're going to need going forward. So we're going to talk about how harnessing that agile working, look at how it can work for us in the virtual setting, and then move on to cover innovation in disrupted times. So 4 innovation principles, some inspiring examples, hopefully, and then some Q&A on what next and where we think this might take us. So why innovation and why agility? Why are they kind of relevant right now? Surely we're in a crisis, and the first thing we need to do is kind of stop the bleeding before we try to teach our patient new tricks. Do we have time to muse on innovation? Surely we just have to act. I think one of Google's mantras springs to mind when I think about this, and why innovation and agility are relevant right now. And that is the mantra that creativity loves constraint. When we're in a fix, we literally have to think outside the box. And right now, the ability to think differently, to implement new ideas, to adapt to new and changing circumstances is actually the difference between life and death for some people. And it's certainly the challenge, you know, around having a business to come back to versus going under for other people. So a crisis can do a lot for us in terms of innovation and agility. It creates new customer needs and habits. Some of them might be here to stay. They might become permanent fixtures that remain well beyond this period of COVID-19. Depending on how fundamental that changes, it can result in entirely new and permanent market change. Or at the very least, it can offer some potentially short-term advantages and opportunities that might turn into kind of longer-term business strategy. Lots of education institutions, mine included, have accelerated their digital offer. And that acceleration, we hope, is going to stand us in really good stead beyond this kind of time of crisis. So the crisis helps create some focus, but innovation and agility and agile responses also give us some control back. And again, as I will say kind of repeatedly, innovation is an optimistic and positive pursuit. So it's really important that we kind of recognize that. A crisis can accelerate our innovation, and as these new problems develop, it forces us to think differently and to think innovatively. Please let us know over the course of the next half an hour or so of examples that you're experiencing, what's going on for you. I saw a meme on Facebook actually, which asked which one of these 3 has accelerated your digital transformation, your CEO, your CTO, or COVID-19. I think innovation and agile working is enabling a lot of us at the moment to create the kind of focus that helps us feel like we've got a little bit more control, you know, in these very uncertain times. So let's think a little bit about agile to make sure we're on the same page. It is a bit of a buzzword. It's a set of principles. We like to think about it as much as a mindset as we do about a set of working practices. It's the opposite of what we would call blueprint thinking. So an agile mindset is there to help us when there is no blueprint. It's about openness, curiosity, adaptability. You will know it's originally a project management approach and synonymous with this kind of software development, project management, and a set of practices, specific practices that are agile, often based on and kind of the misassumption really that you have to be co-located. As many of us are finding out, these agile working can work just as well in a virtual space, but it does require that we pay attention to slightly different things, I think. Really important not to mistake agile for speed. We hear a lot of this, clients saying, you know, it's actually about sprinting through my existing to-do list. It isn't actually about the speed. It does, however, if you do Agile kind of properly, create efficient, goal-oriented processes, and it helps your small kind of pizza teams keep working, which is why it's a pacey way to approach a challenge. Obviously, it works at a team level and an organization level. But both of those things demand that a certain set of conditions are met. So Agile working doesn't happen well in very hierarchical organizations, for example. You know, we need flatter structures and greater degrees of autonomy across teams that are clearly aligned on the goals that they're trying to deliver together. Customer proximity, iterative, experimental approaches, and not all organizations, and indeed not all problems, require an Agile approach, but it can be really a useful way of connecting project working and, of course, innovating together. So in an Agile organization, we sometimes kind of actually talk about the 3 Fs to frame organization agility. There's this idea about speed of decision making, flexibility, being ready to shift and adapt, but really importantly that those 2 things are focused in a way which is consistent with the goals of the organization and the needs of the customer. So we need this kind of cross-organizational mindset shift for new ways of working, not the same tasks but faster, moving away from that need for blueprint approaches towards a kind of innovation growth mindset, which is about working in efficient and customer-centric ways to deliver smarter solutions. Some components of organization agility kind of worth reflecting on, actually. What does an Agile organization even kind of look like? How might we design that, draw that out, and start to understand what it means? You know, there are flexible, flatter structures that help agility in terms of organization design, processes which are designed to help us move quickly and easily with speed and with efficiency. And I think, again, looking at what COVID-19 has forced organizations to have to contemplate in terms of their processes is not necessarily a bad thing. It's forced us to take out some of the unnecessary process that we just don't have the manpower at the time or the technology to pay attention to right now. The other thing in terms of org design, you know, that we see in organizations that are truly what we would describe as agile is it's a much more flexible way of allocating resource. Again, being able to flex your teams and your resources is really important for agile working, as of course is encouraging cross-silo working. So you need to focus on the way approvals are made, how decisions are made, and perhaps ask yourselves how much more flexible you can be to help your teams work in this agile way. Next up is collaboration. Innovative organizations prioritize collaboration both inside and out. You have to think about the right space and time to do this. It's often about the micro relationships between people, how comfortable we are being inexpert. One of the things I talk about with innovation projects a lot is allowing yourself to feel comfortably lost. You know, you have to be able to do that in order to innovate. We don't come to an innovation challenge with all the answers. We need to collaborate with others, but we need to collaborate in ways that might expose our lack of knowledge, our lack of expertise. So it's really important that we pay attention to good relationships as much as we pay attention to good process when we're thinking about organization agility. We need to learn by experimentation. It's you know, you won't surprise anybody to see experimentation in this list of key components. But you know, it's about also accepting that innovation and experimentation doesn't always work, and we can't condemn these efforts as failure. We have to figure out what we can learn from them, what we can take forward. So agile organizations are able to focus on the innovation process as a really a learning journey. Always asking, what do we need to learn next? Up at the top and on the left, power and control, really, really interesting organization dynamics. When you look at the shift to agile working, this kind of idea about control versus the autonomy that an agile team needs is often very, very difficult. One of the most difficult things for organizations to kind of adapt to and work with. But really important for the speed of delivery, that there are fewer bottlenecks, that teams are empowered to move through an agile innovation process, and that the system level stuff doesn't get in the way. So again, asking yourself and thinking about how willing leaders are in the organisation to give some of that autonomy away. COVID again has forced our hands for many reasons. Some of that kind of control and power has been relinquished, which again we need to celebrate and take on in a really positive way and think, well, what does that provide us with as a kind of bit of muscle memory that we've learned the whole world didn't fall apart. Actually, we were able to do more and think better together as we devolved some power and control out to teams trying to do the right thing at this difficult time. You know, trust again is a key factor, and the sort of psychological safety needed to experiment to get things done together. You simply can't innovate well if you don't feel heard, if you don't feel supported, and if the environment is lacking in trust. You know, you're not likely to throw yourself into uncertain situations, creative problem solving, optimistically, if the trust isn't there. And of course, customer at the table, which is absolutely essential. And I'll come on to talk about that in a little bit more detail. So making Agile work virtually, we like to think of it as working out loud. I love this phrase, and it's something that's really helping me at the moment as I think, you know, trying to work in an Agile way with my teams and my colleagues on innovation. Trying to think of it as working out loud. So really trying to over communicate, making sure the transparency is there. And there are two sort of pillars really to working out loud. The first is about structure and the second is about sharing. So if you think about how you might have adapted to virtual team working recently, you've probably jumped onto some calls, possibly there's been no agenda, maybe random people have taken initiative to set some stuff up and to circulate things. You might have blurred the boundaries between formal meetings and informal fun time, but actually how productive can you be without some of these structures and without some of these collaborative tools to help and to assist you. So thinking about structure is really important, and some of the formal processes around Agile working can really help. The team meeting structure, the daily stand-ups, start to create some routine and some normalcy, I suppose, from the challenge of working remotely. But do accept there's always going to be a productivity hit, you know, even if you've got the best sort of sharing platforms and you've got the right structures going on, you need to really accept that it isn't a national holiday and it is a national crisis, a global crisis. And to try and hold on to those kind of challenges as you go. And I think being mindful really about where you're making time for creative problem solving. And to start to ask yourself, take a little bit of time to think when you're at your creative best, before you start to expect that from others. And then think, you know, if you're in a team of people trying to innovate, trying to creative problem solve together, particularly in the virtual space, you know, how might you create the conditions for creative thinking? What stimulus might you be able to bring? You know, there's tons of stuff that's been opened up, more access to more kind of fascinating resources than there's ever been, and editing through some of that, bringing some of that stimulus to your idea generation sessions is a really helpful thing to do to help people get unstuck and flex into new ways of thinking about solving problems together. Making sure that you signal the difference between ideas time and solution time. Again, that's where some of the formal kind of process around Agile working can be really, really helpful, being very distinctive about what people are trying to do together and when. And it helps to sort of think about ways in which you can stop the panic, because everyone's been through phases of panic and distress, particularly at the moment, how you can stop that from squashing curiosity and manage the times at which you're trying to solve and innovate together in a different way from the times you're trying to implement and action things together. And also remembering to invite in new ideas, new people, and alternative perspectives. Again, one of the benefits and the positives to come out of the COVID crisis, I think, is this willingness for people to talk to each other, to be open to alternatives and to be open to options and ideas, and potentially to connect with to connect with one another in service of a common goal. So some principles for innovation. Some of these are kind of, you know, what you would expect. Some of them perhaps, you know, more important in light of the current crisis that we're facing. But actually all innovation starts with asking brilliant questions. The questions of what if and why not, but getting a really good emotive question is absolutely the way to inspire your Agile team, your innovation team, to ensure everyone's got a really clear direction for their innovation effort. To think about the challenge you have as a question and to really use that question to help you hone in on your brief. To question assumptions you're making about the challenge that you face. And every sector has what we would call foundation assumptions, the stuff that we think we always do or we never do. And again, COVID has called into question some of those foundation assumptions about the ways that we think we have to operate, the ways we think we have to serve the customers and the stakeholders that we're responsible to, even why we're here at all, what business we're even in, what business we should be in. So there's a lot of this good questioning going on right now. It's very easy to focus on the what, but all good innovation starts with a really powerful why, and those come from excellent, excellent questions. So when you phrase your innovation challenge as a question, there's some really helpful things you can do to challenge your thinking. You can query the assumptions, you can get beyond the what towards the why. You can try and generalize your innovation question, take it up a level, you know, really see how big and how broad you can make it. You can break it down, conversely, into really small, very specific questions and try and see what that does to the ways in which you might approach coming up with different and alternative ideas. And one of our favorites in the kind of innovation community is re-expression, thinking about the question from the perspective of lots and lots of different audiences. And the reason to do that is because it forces you to rethink your question from different perspectives. It helps you see alternative ways in that will direct you to different types of solution. So asking great questions. There's some examples here of how you might challenge your questions with three kind of options: to generalize, to break down, or to re-express. You know, if you generalize a question, you open the solution space up to a much broader kind of spectrum of potential. So instead of asking about lower engine emissions, you might really generalize up to thinking big scale, system level, environmentally friendly transport systems. If you're looking to break a question down and think about lateness amongst part-time staff, you might think about micro ways in which you might motivate people to arrive on time and then build up from there. And last, again, one of my favorites is to add something emotive, to think about you know, how you can add an imperative or some emotive language to the question you're trying to ask. Because at the end of the day, we're more interested in solving problems and coming up with ideas when we care. So one way of doing that is to re-express your innovation question as an I wish statement. The next principle is about empowered agility. It means asking not what do we need to do next, but to think about not the task, but what the next learning opportunity looks like. I was recently at a startup event and one of the startup companies was pitching, and he said, you know, the way that his team worked is, you know, every day they kind of sit down, they reflect, and they ask themselves, what do we need to learn next? And I thought it was the best expression of this kind of empowered agility, this kind of holy grail, if you like, of that sort of startup-y energy for re-engaging with the question that you're trying to ask on a really regular basis. So small autonomous teams using an experimental approach to do this kind of build, measure, learn, iterative cycle of innovation is really what we mean when we talk about empowered agility. Obviously you need to be aligned on what you're trying to do and why you're trying to do it, but it's very much part of the kind of lean methodology to take this prototype, test, build, measure, learn approach. So prototyping is your friend, particularly right now. You know, it's about getting as much quick feedback as you can and iterating ideas as you go. But possibly most important is to fall in love with the problem. Now, what do we mean fall in love with the problem? Aren't problems just things we need to get rid of? Isn't that what innovation is there to help us do? Wouldn't it make sense to love solutions instead? It's our kind of human nature to love answers. We naturally fall in love with the first right idea that we believe is going to solve whatever challenge we're working on. If you think about the last time you were in an innovation or an idea generation session, or even when you had a kind of last had a really difficult thing to kind of think through together, it's a huge relief when someone comes up with something you think might be plausible, never mind something you think might be exciting. And it's really difficult to let go of that once you've started to hook into it. But we need to kind of recognize that what happens as soon as we do think we found an answer is we tend to stop innovating. And that often keeps us from finding the right solutions, because our first ideas, to be honest, are rarely our best ideas. And they're often the ideas that other people will have also had. And much innovation is a competitive, commercially competitive exercise. So we don't want to be falling in love with the first right idea that the people down the street are probably going to have or have already had anyway, right? So we need to work out how we can overcome the kind of counterproductive tendency, I suppose, we have to fixate on specific solutions. You know, agile methods do provide a structured process to help focus on the problem, and then through experimentation, iterate towards better solutions. So being really clear on your why, on your question, again, perhaps turning it into a kind of vision statement can really, really help. It never ceases to surprise me how often teams skip this really important step of identifying the right question to be working on. It often involves spending a lot of time understanding your customers to get the deep customer empathy you need to identify truly meaningful problems. We have to care about the problems we're trying to solve, remember. This isn't a kind of flippant exercise. And I always challenge my innovation groups at Ashford to really come up with sexy questions, sexy problems to fall in love with. You know, let's try and bring some energy and some emotion to this. It really helps us not get fixated on solutions, but sort of treat the problem, if you like, as a kind of North Star, as our beating heart, and continually referring back to it. Really make sure that you're not coming up with ideas that are not going to take you anywhere. I guess the other thing that falling in love with the problem kind of is connected to is a relentless customer focus. So there's more data than there has ever been. We need to be connected to our customers in ways that we haven't before. We need to generate insight to understand these new behaviours. We need to engage with them through particularly digital channels in ways that we might not have done before. And we need to set up some way of getting really fantastic creative feedback loops going on with our customers right now. And I cannot stress this one enough. You know, the customer is absolutely central to innovation, whether that customer is a stakeholder, a citizen, somebody who's buying a product of yours at the end, or whether you're in a B2B kind of context. Full stop. The customer is absolutely the beating heart of where the next lot of innovation is going to come from. Where have your customers gone? You know, how are they experiencing you right now? What are they learning about the world? And how are they navigating this crisis in ways that might have an impact on you and on your relationship with them going forward? There's so much data out there, you know, everything from how many paintbrushes and barbecues have been purchased in Milton Keynes, how many downloads of Evermind or Headspace have been happening across in Tokyo, what the overhangs of this period of anxiety are likely to be for us. What data have you got on your customers? Who's on it? Who's thinking about that in your organization right now? Who's watching? Who's in touch with how they're thinking and feeling? A lot of companies I've heard are cancelling their customer research, which I have to say I think is idiotic, because it's during this period of reflection that we can truly learn, you know, what matters. How many of you have questioned your consumption priorities? You know, the brands that you might be seeing, you know, that you shop with or that you buy stuff from. Are they doing the right thing? You know, when the day of reckoning happens, as it kind of inevitably will, how are you going to feel if your insurer makes billions because there are no car accidents? You know, the crisis is a point of panic and anxiety, but it's also a point of reflection for so many people globally about how they want the world to be and how they are agentic, how they're agents in making that happen with the purchases they make and the brands they choose to patronize. You know, on a positive note, digital channels are really coming into their own. As I've said, you know, we've got octogenarian relatives on the House Party app. you know, Zoom meetings are being Zoom raided by bored hackers. But the benefit of online shopping, of click and collect, of multiple content that's being streamed for the first time and tried out by millions of people. So if we weren't fully digital before, so many of us absolutely are now. I guess for me, questions about overperformance have really kind of reared their head. The things that we've come to expect from everyday products that we used to rely on, you know, but actually something different is driving my purchasing behavior. I'm definitely tolerant of good enough in a way that I really didn't think I would be and wasn't before. You know, so perfect is no longer the enemy of the good. Home haircut disasters, of course, notwithstanding. Humanity's accelerating alongside all of this technology, but our need to be with each other is still as large and as kind of important as it has ever been. And it's that that's being really kind of tested right now. So if previously your brand was focused on innovation around customer experiences that were predicated on individualism, on personalization, on privacy, on reification, perhaps that trend might switch 360 as a result of COVID. And we might see customers wanting experiences which are more collective, are more communal, are more social. So if pre-COVID, I wanted tailored, individual, personalized and unique kind of moments because I'm worth it, maybe after COVID, I might be seeking togetherness. I might be seeking community. I might want global moments because I know, whether I like it or not, that we are all in this together. And in a sense, we are all worth it. So regardless, we're not going to come out the same way, which is why these focusing in on what you can understand about your customers right now and going forward could not be more important. So if there's one thing you take out of today, it's to really smarten up on your customer data, really work out which new channels are exciting them and sustaining them, connect in, look for insight, and really find out about the new behaviors and needs. Try and adopt these kind of positive feedback loops so the customer genuinely sitting at the heart of your decision making. And of course, agile approaches have the customers beating hearts at the core. The last of the 4 principles is about optimism, and from that optimism comes opportunity. So it takes a lot of energy to innovate. It's actually kind of knackering and tiring, but it's basically optimistic optimism kind of packaged up is the way I like to think about it. It doesn't make it selfish, but it does mean that you've got to create the right conditions for people to want to do it. And I think right now that often means asking, how are you, first of all, and being that kind of empathic, high EQ person, creating the psychological safety that your teams are going to want to have if they're going to put any kind of risky ideas on the table. And I think the flip side of that is trying to engender a belief, an authentic belief together that you can do this. And again, it comes back to the point I think I made at the beginning, which is that innovation is fundamentally optimistic. And so you have to kind of believe that you can, and you have to convince other people that they can, and you can do this together in order to get them on board. So some tips, if you're thinking about how you might idea generate together in these sort of disruptive times. I think the first is to remember that life is a remix. I love this phrase from, you know, the kind of innovation community that I work with. Some of us call it stealing with glee, but someone somewhere somehow has solved the principles of what you're looking to solve before. It won't be the specific issue that you're tackling necessarily, but the principles of it will apply. So this isn't about looking for best practice kind of blueprint stuff, but it's about, it's not exactly kind of replicating, but it's identifying the principles of what you're trying to do, casting your net really wide, thinking about how you might remix what other people have done and bring that to bear on the challenge that you're looking for together. And that's really the search for stimulus. And there's so much data out there available in a way that never has been before. It seems a crying shame to kind of miss that opportunity to bring it in. And think about how you might use that information to innovate for yourselves. I think this idea of competition is meaningless right now is also quite an empowering thing. we've seen all sorts of companies collaborating with one another in order to be competitive over the long term, but in order to kind of solve and ideate together in new and different ways, and genuinely being open for innovation. And whether that is running an accelerator, as lots of the health providers in the world have started to do, in asking for not only for vaccines, but also for practical on the ground solutions for teams trying to work together. Experimentation, absolutely go for it. If not now, then when? And it partly because, as I said, this idea that good enough is good enough right now. And that's a fantastic opportunity to not let perfect be the enemy, which is what happens to so many teams that we work on innovation with. That we've got this kind of ridiculously high bar of perfection before we will throw anything out to a customer. Really kind of worrisome and fearful that we might get an answer back from them that we don't like. But actually in this situation, that kind of data that you can get back from these early experiments is absolutely your friend. So our lives are currently run on experts interpreting data. Data's had a kind of a renaissance, I think. The expert is back. And experts use data in a fantastic array of ways. We can do the same thing. I think the thing from an innovation perspective to remember is to capture the unusual, as well as the kind of comparative and the real-time data that you might be used to remember the outliers at this particular time, because that's where the disruptors are going. That's what they're looking for. They're looking for the outliers, they're looking for the anomalies, they're looking for the unusual. So remember to do that when you're thinking about having ideas together. Find some unusual and alternative data points to add into the mix, and think about how that throws a different perspective on the challenge you're trying to solve together. Listening to one another, and of course to your customers. I again, still sort of really never ceases to amaze me how many organizations, teams try and sort of sit around and have ideas together and just rely on, one or two people in the room. Oh, you're a good ideas person, you'll kind of help us. But really taking the time to listen to what's going on out there, to use that data, to use that stimulus, and to bring your customers into the room. They're fantastically insightful, both to watch and to hear. And, that brings in the last point. It's a kind of similar one, really, which is to invite in alternative perspectives. We all live in a bubble, and we tend to innovate in a bubble as well. One of the really important, I guess, characteristics of an agile organization is its willingness to bring the outside in, is its hunger for ideas, stimulus, inspiration from outside its own sector. This is difficult, but again, extremely important. You plant 2 seeds, you don't know which seedling is going to germinate first. And, we do have to exercise some judgment, when we're trying to innovate, where there is no data, when we don't know which seedling is going to sprout first. And this is true in times of crisis as much as it is true in calmer seas. You simply don't know immediately what the right option is. And so we need to allow an idea to mature a little bit so that we can interrogate it. Things like design thinking approaches really help here, and prototyping elements of your idea, getting that customer feedback can help you work through these challenging pieces of unknown innovation. One of the things that Google does is tackle the hardest parts of the problem first. So Google X is the Exponential Innovation Unit. Google has recently renamed it Alphabet, based on moonshots, which are these kind of huge scale but technically feasible challenges. It's where Google Glass, driverless cars, and various other exponential innovation projects kind of take place. And they have a moonshot blueprint. This man is Astro Teller, and he talks about running at all the hardest parts of the problem first. They have a very strict process around exponential innovation, which includes setting a very clear direction. The moonshots have to answer world-changing problems, But they have a very strict criteria for determining which ideas to pursue and which ideas to leave behind. So they actively try to kill off ideas and projects, and they do that in an incredibly optimistic way. But they believe that if you run at the hardest parts first, you'll have the most robust case to take your innovation forward. A couple of last points. The first is to refresh your idea generation toolkit. There's tons of fantastic tools out there, Mural being one, Miro being another. Actually, I was talking to some innovation colleagues this week who are all kind of suggesting that on some, for some projects, these virtual digital toolkits are actually better and more productive than the face-to-face equivalent. Again, I will bang the customer drum, but finding out ways in which you can connect with your customers in demos are brilliant. I'm not being paid by them, by the way, I wish, but for a retail bank recently, we had people on here talking about money worries, making money timelines, recording videos. It's a really great ethnographic way of getting that kind of community going with your customers. And last but not least is about being inspired. So 3 examples here. So from furniture makers to software developers around the world, people are adapting to the pandemic. These are door openers, which people have made for cab drivers that have been featured on the World Economic Forum blog. You know, a flurry of innovation from big companies that we would expect, from Ford to Airbus, LVMH. People are retooling their operations to make critical equipment, to make hand sanitizers. The fashion house Barber has been supplying PPE and clothing, scrubs to hospital workers up in the north of England this week. But importantly, so are the little guys, right? Anybody with a 3D printer. We've got schools making visors. And I think there's something democratic, there's something human, there's something seriously agile about the ways in which everybody believes that they have something to offer in right now. And so I would say, keep an eye on what those perspectives are. When you're working out loud, do pay attention to the mental health of the people in your teams. It's a very anxiety causing time, but hopefully innovation can bring some positivity and some optimism to that. Remember the requirement for psychological safety if you're asking people to offer in risky, new, challenging perspectives and ideas. And 30 minutes of focused effort on innovation is better than a whole day of fleeting attention. So really think about the time that you're taking to create the space to innovate and to be agile together. So we've got a couple of minutes for questions. If I can just have a look at the Q&A. Keeping the window of opportunity open for a longer period after a crisis in order to foster permanent innovation. I think that's a fantastic question, Attilio. I think the window of opportunity is actually about the learning that you're doing right now. I think recognizing where the muscle memory is coming from. And I think that's about both looking internally as well as paying attention to what other people outside of your sector, but potentially trying to ideate around similar kind of problem principles to you. I think as long as you kind of keep a track of that and remember what's going on as these kind of case studies, keep that kind of vibe alive. We're talking about this at the moment. We're doing some action research and we've kind of come up with this sort of 3-way answer, if you like, which is the innovation mindset, the growth mindset, and the crisis mindset. And what you're talking about is that crisis mindset and how we're sort of seeing it play out is that it really creates the imperative, it creates the urgency, and it makes the problem emotive. So I think those principles are the things that will try and encourage people to try and hang on to, not the panic and not the anxiety, but the imperative and the kind of emotive nature of why we're trying to do this together, that I think will help us continue to innovate well together. Let's have a look down here. How can we be agile in a hierarchical company or situation? Do we just give up? Never give up. No, this is innovation. This is positive. It's optimistic and it's opportunistic. I think start small is the answer. I think pilot. I think experiment. I think find a few kindred souls. Agile teams are by nature pretty small. And actually, if you're trying to do small things, if you're trying to do little pilots, you'd be surprised actually how much autonomy you can create. And if you can get some quick wins, if you can do that with customers, because customers often, when they speak and are helpful to your innovation process, they get heard. So if you can bring some ideas to the table to the rest of the organization with that kind of customer insight at the heart of it, I think that also really helps. So you can definitely be agile within a hierarchy. It's harder because of the components of organization agility that we talked about, but it's certainly not impossible. You will do well if you can find some kindred spirits to work on it with you. Psychological safety in teams, again, it's absolutely essential. I think listening and being able to ask questions. Be careful what you wish for when you ask for everybody to be innovative, because that really does mean you have to get very, very good at listening. You have to get very, very good at fielding uncomfortable, challenging, and very difficult questions somehow. And you have to be willing to be challenged on some of your foundation assumptions, as we kind of talked about before. One of the things I think COVID has done for people's kind of psychological safety to an extent that's positive is forced us to reassess. And again, that kind of muscle memory of having been through that reassessment and having been forced to challenge some of our foundation assumptions. Again, I'm hopeful that means people understand a little bit more about the importance of creating the right environment to ask questions outside and beyond a crisis, that actually it's a healthy thing to have good dialogue and good questions going on in an organization. If you can't, it's very, very difficult to innovate if you can't kind of question. So I absolutely agree with you, Marcus, that psychological safety in teams is a really critical precursor for healthy kind of positive innovation. I think I've got one more. I think we're slightly overrunning. I promised I wouldn't. Let's have a look at here. Yeah, the relationship between agility and resilience. Again, a fantastic question from Nancy. I think it's they're really symbiotic. As I said, innovation. People have this kind of idea that innovation is all the kind of easy stuff. It's the bean bags and it's the kind of post-it notes and it's the fun. It's not. It's actually running at the hardest parts of questions first. It's daring to ask the difficult things and daring to believe that you could come up with something that's different. And it requires an awful lot of energy, both your own and other people's. So, making sure that you're managing your state and understanding how to create that environment for creativity, that judgment-free, open, curious place for yourself and for others does require an awful lot. And of course, resilience comes in where our experiments don't turn out quite as we wanted them to. That's a really difficult pill to swallow sometimes. It's why falling in love with the problem can be quite helpful in maintaining that resilience, because you don't get overly worried. Your ideas are cheaper when you've fallen in love with the problem. You don't get overly worried if somebody comes and asks you to change it, or a customer kind of gives some feedback that means you've fundamentally got to change what you've been working on. But it's difficult to be adaptive because we naturally kind of recoil sometimes from the discomfort of not knowing and the discomfort of challenge. But so I think very much symbiotic relationship between agility and resilience. I would like to say thank you so much. I apologize for speeding up towards the end, and I do have a tendency to talk incredibly quickly. So I hope I can see so many of you have stayed to the end, which I really appreciate. I would like to wish you all the best with your innovation efforts right now. I would like to remind you to be optimistic about the fact that you've got some new innovation muscle memory from this crisis in a way that I have and everybody has. And that's a massive opportunity for all of us going forward to kind of think about the world in this kind of agile, innovative, opportunistic, optimistic way. We've got a series of online skills. So if you like this kind of chat and you're interested in these kinds of topics, we've got an absolute plethora of different stuff available through our HALT online skills. network, and the link to that is posted in the chat. So I will close by saying thank you very, very much again, and have a fantastic rest of the day, rest of the evening, rest of the morning, wherever you are in the world. It's been a pleasure, and stay safe.